Hi, this is Paul, and some of you will recognize this guy. I don't know how I first stumbled across you. It was definitely your church reviews. And then I was looking through the rest of your back catalog, and there was a bunch of music and stuff back there.
Hmm.
So, and your atheist church reviews, I think they're really well done. And I was actually quite surprised your channel is as small as it is. So.
Well, I'm very appreciative of that. And yeah, I don't know how you found my channel. I don't know how anyone finds my channel, truthfully, because I've got like 0 subscribers. But yeah, appreciate you watching, man. Um, no, thank you. It's my channel is very weird. I usually tell people it's kind of the tripartite bastard child of my memes, my music, and my discussions on religion. And so the atheist church audit stuff has been the most recent iteration of my, talking about religion. And but this feels like the first time where I've like struck a chord with people, or I've hit my stride and like found the format that just works for me to be able to talk about religion in a consistent way rather than just, you know, one-off videos that are not very engaging.
Well, I think your videos are very engaging, and you obviously put a lot of time into them. You've obviously got a lot of skills in terms of camera and sound because that's not easy to do. And, you're honest, but I think at the same time, very fair to the churches. And it would be really easy in internet culture to just go around dunking on people, and you don't do that. So I,
Yeah.
goodness
It's
knows, anybody who stops at Living Stones will find a well, they would have a lot to talk about. I'll just say that. So I think I mentioned you in a video at one point, and then Chad, of course, contacted you, and you did a conversation with Chad, and then you contacted me. So I very much as is the case, I mean, people make videos, people can talk, people can do all that, but what most interests me are people's stories. And you
yeah.
clearly have a story because you do these. You wouldn't go around visiting different churches if you didn't care about. It's kind of hard to figure out what to care about, but you certainly do care.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know how much of my story you want or
I want
need.
a lot of it. So let's start with the home you grew up in. So we'll begin there.
The home I grew up in. Home I grew up in was wonderful. Both my parents were believers. Was raised Assemblies of God, but I was kind of a young, stupid hellion until I was 13. At the age of 13, I had my religious conversion, my religious experience. It's a longer story, but the gist of it was I kind of came face to face with nihilism,
Mm.
and yeah, I just remember never giving a crap about religion up to that point, and then immediately praying, God, please be real. And that was my prayer,
Mm.
just God, please be real. And that was what started me on my journey of being a devout, devoted believer of Jesus. I was a very committed Christian, and for much of my life, I knew that I was the most spiritually devout person, like in any room that I walked into.
Mm.
Um, like the church that I grew up in, um, after we moved when I was 13, we started going to a little Foursquare church, tiny little white church on the corner.
Yeah.
And I was the only kid in that youth group who didn't get pregnant out of wedlock. Um, not like one of the few. I mean, the only one. And yeah, weird times. So
That's so interesting. Because well, there's so yeah, we won't go there, but there's so much. I mean, Christian culture is so interesting in America, and
yeah,
just that dynamic isn't now okay. So obviously you didn't get pregnant. You didn't get anyone pregnant, um, because you seriously embraced the Christian sexual ethic.
yes, yeah. And I don't know how much you want me to go into detail there, but
I'm not gonna, That salacious video Vanderclay did with the atheist church auditor. I don't know, go into as much detail as you want to go. But, you know, to me, the question isn't who you did with what. The question is your thinking in terms
Yeah, yeah,
of, you know, you were really committed. And obviously, when you're a teenager, for myself, when I was a teenager, for many young, committed Christian teenagers,
mm,
I don't know if it's sexist to say, especially men. I don't know what it's like to be a young woman, but to be a young man, the Christian sexual ethic is a demanding one.
right.
And
Yeah,
when you're a teenager, you're really feeling it.
you're not wrong. Um, so
So was
yeah,
it a
I mean,
culture? I mean, because so I didn't grow up in sort of an American fundamentalist church, but was
right.
it one of these purity cultures where they had weird purity rings and those kind of things, or not too much of that?
It was, but I always have to preface all of that and say that, like, you know, most of my atheist friends, their experience was they had religion shoved down their throat,
Mm,
and I didn't. From a really young age, I was the initiator of a lot of this stuff. So I did wear a purity ring. I was, you know, faithfully abstinent
yeah.
for the decade that I was a believer. Um, I didn't look at porn. I didn't masturbate for 7 years. Um, I,
Master of your domain.
yeah, uh, tried to be anyway. Gosh, it is, um, yeah, I remember I was the weird kid in high school who wouldn't hug girls because I found that to be too sexually salacious.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, I mean, I took that very seriously, but it was never like, oh man, my youth pastor is going to yell at me or like God's going to judge me.
right.
It was that I truly believed in the Christian sexual ethic
Yeah.
and that, like, no, this is something that I want to do for my future wife. This is something that I think will um, further benefit my relationship, you know, 10, 20 years down the road, whenever it happens, if I'm patient with it. You know, I'm building up sexual collateral that will pay off in my marriage.
Right. And
And
about, I'm just guessing at your age, but about that time, there were a lot of books that were sort of
yeah,
promoting that
mhm,
framing, that approach at that point. A lot of that
right.
whole thing has sort of collapsed, but that was my guess is,
Yeah,
given just guessing your age, it's kind of where that was at.
definitely, definitely. So, I mean, it's funny because when
There's a
you know,
countdown going next to you. I don't know if
oh,
that means
sorry,
anything. No,
that
it's
is an
okay. I just want to make sure your battery doesn't run out.
no, that is an unfortunate hiccup of this camera that every 20 minutes on the dot, I'll need to refresh it or else it thinks it's going to sleep.
Oh,
So
oh, that is a
yeah,
problem.
just let me know
Okay.
whenever that's happening. Anyway, um, so yeah, I remember, you know, because when I became a believer and you know, I was all in, just guns
Yeah.
ablaze, I think that I became more religious than my parents,
Mhm.
in a sense,
Yeah.
to the extent that I do remember my dad a couple of times being like, "Hey, Bucko, yeah, maybe tone it down a bit." You know, I was dating a girl when I was 15 and we dated for like 2 or 3 months and I never kissed her. Um, because I was like, well, either I want to wait until marriage to kiss her, or I want God to clearly reveal to me that it's okay. And neither of
Wow.
those happened, so we never kissed.
How did she feel about that?
Probably stickled. Uh, uh, what word am I looking for? Um, gypped. Yeah,
Yeah,
gypped is a good word.
the dude hasn't even kissed me yet. What's wrong with him?
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh, but we talked it through. Um, man,
So that
I
was
feel
high
more gypped.
school. So you're in that mode in high school. Did you go to Christian
Yeah.
college?
I did. So my whole arc, right? So converted at 13, you know, running away from nihilism. Um, and I usually say that I kind of pursued, you know, ran away from the idea of nihilism um, by chasing after apologetics and by chasing after Christian mysticism.
Hmm.
So, you know, I was pretty deep in the Pentecostal movement, but specifically kind of the mystical, ecstatic experiences. side of things that I still kind of have a soft spot for. Um, yeah, the Kim Walker Smith kind of version of what that looks like.
I don't
Um,
know. I'm not familiar with her.
she was, I believe she was the head of Jesus Culture, Bethel and Redding
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
some of that kind of stuff. I wasn't quite all in on that, and I'm also always like nervous to throw out any names whenever I talk about like, the kinds of Christians that I liked and followed,
Yeah.
because invariably there's somebody who's going to try to like invalidate my background with like, oh, well, no wonder he apostatized. He was listening to Bill Johnson, or like, well, yeah, but I was also listening to John Piper, and I was also listening to James White, and I was listening to Ravi Zacharias, whoever your favorite preacher is too. So don't throw me out too quick. Um, anyway. But yeah, so I was into all that in high school. My junior year of high school, I became the worship leader at this private, Christian high school. And then senior year, I became the worship leader and the student chaplain. So I was, preaching a couple of times a week to the middle schoolers and high schoolers, and then I was singing to Jesus and standing on a cafeteria table outside, preaching to the kids, and that was just kind of my whole world. Um,
It
so
seems at this point that being a worship leader is a really hazardous thing if you want to keep your faith. So many of the high profile defectors are
yeah,
worship leaders. There is something there.
I don't know what it is, man. I mean, may I yeah, I mean, maybe it's that worship leaders, are almost unanimously in um, evangelical, cultures, or what am I saying? Evangelical churches, right? And so those tend to be more conservative ideologically, but then they're very expressive and emotive. And I think those two eventually come to a head where, the gay issue always comes up, and, like, oh man, is God really that harsh with hell? And but you're so emotional, and it's very happy and sappy and lovey and dovey, and then you have to come and reckon with doctrine. And so I think that probably the people who are more likely to come, or who are more likely to stay in the faith, are, one or the other
Hmm.
falls away, right? Doctrine wins out, or your emotions win out. And so you either become a more liberal Christian, uh, by means of becoming a United Methodist, or some other liberal progressive denomination. I don't know if United Methodists are the progressive ones or
They are
not, but
now.
they are now.
They
Okay,
just
got
had
it.
their split.
Ah, of course. I feel like it's every couple of years. I just feel like I'm, watching Scooby-Doo reruns, watching church culture. Let's split up, gang. Um, Ridiculous. Anyway,
So what college did you go to?
so after high school, I was like, well, I want to be the next Billy Graham or something like that. I want to go save the world for Jesus, and sing and do all that jazz. So I was like, well, I definitely don't want to go to a stale, uh, you know, Christian college where I'm going to go, get pumped full of a bunch of head knowledge. I want somewhere that's going to churn me out to be a zealot. So
Which you
I
already
went,
were.
yeah, yeah. So I wanted a place to further refine that. And I ended up going to, I believe it's no longer in existence, but it was called Fire School of Ministry, um, which is kind of akin to like a YWAM type thing. So it is a 3-year non-accredited school of practical ministry. So usually when I talk about it, I just tell people, oh, I went to a pseudo seminary, and they don't know what that means. So I usually just say seminary and uh, cross my fingers. Um,
Well, I had heard you mention seminary before, so that kind of piqued my interest to say, oh, well, which seminary
yeah.
did he go to? So okay, but
So not,
that makes sense.
yeah, not bona fide seminary. I'm not
Right.
ordained or anything, but for all intents and purposes,
The focus of everything was deployment of Christian ministers, either at
yes.
home or abroad.
Exactly, exactly. So Fire had a huge network of missionaries for its size. Um, Actually, do you know Dr. Michael Brown?
Yeah, he's on YouTube, isn't he?
He is, yeah. He's a pretty big presence on YouTube. He wrote the 5 volumes, answering Jewish objections to Jesus.
Oh,
A Queer Thing Happened to America. So, he's pretty conservative.
okay.
Um, nice dude though. But so he was the head of Fire School of Ministry. So I
Uh,
was one of his students. Um, and yeah, graduated 2016 from his neck of the woods. And then it shut down 3, 4 years after that. So
well,
was
it's
what it was.
it's it's probably kind of a typical evangelical parachurch story that some sort of biggish name celebrity gets some traction and gathers some money and says, we can finally do ministry preparation right, and whoosh, they put it all together and it goes, and then it just kind of,
Yep. Yep.
because it's hard to compete with the old guys, the Moody and the Fuller and the, um, all the other established that are sort of around. So yeah, no, I get it. So what'd you
Absolutely.
do? So what did they launch you into?
Deconversion.
Oh,
Well, it's funny. There was at one point there was a Facebook group that was started called Fire School of Ministry Healing and Restoration Group.
okay.
Um, to recover and heal from the wounds that this school, which I felt was a little melodramatic. Yeah, I feel the need to like preface all of this by saying like they didn't. It was bad, but it wasn't like it wasn't the end of the world.
Yeah.
It wasn't the worst thing. Um, the worst part of it though, and a big part of my story is like occasionally in my church audits, I'll mention that I was a part of a cult. Um,
Hmm.
and so that was, core part of my story that while I was at Fire, right, this 3-year pseudo seminary, they required you to do an internship for a semester. So I was like, cool, well, I'm not gonna stick around here and, also, can I swear? Is that allowed?
Go right ahead.
No? Okay, okay. Um,
Speak your truth.
I'll abstain a little bit. I'm not going to stick around here in bumfrick, North Carolina. I'm going to go somewhere cool. So I met a pastor who lived in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, and I was like, "Oh, Rotterdam, that sounds like cool." And at this point, I was starting to become more intellectual with things, and I was like, I saw some real crazies with the charismania at Fire. So I was getting more into apologetics and early Christian studies and all of that to kind of distance myself a little bit from it. I still was there, but that's kind of what set me apart from the other kids there. Oh, Jared, yeah, he prays, but not quite enough, and he's a little bit of a theology
Yeah,
nerd.
you thought you were a zealot until you weren't there and realized, oh,
Yeah,
there are levels of zealotry above me. It's the same thing that happens to every small town kid. He's really good on the piano. Then he goes to Juilliard and it's like,
yep, yep.
fringes have fringes, baby.
You're not wrong. That's very accurate. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I went uh I went and studied under this pastor, did an internship with him in Rotterdam in the Netherlands for a semester. Um, and I'm comfortable saying that even though here in North Carolina was culty at times, but it wasn't a bona fide cult. But in Rotterdam, that chapter was sectarian enough and domineering enough that I would feel comfortable considering it a cult. Um, that being said, visiting some of the cults that I've visited recently, it's given me a much greater appreciation. Like, oh yeah, it was a cult, but it wasn't like, geez, it wasn't Jim Jones. Some of the other places that I've visited recently, that might be another story. But so yeah, I mean that chapter was really hard and really painful. And I took my faith very seriously, and I took the idea of living out my faith very seriously. Um, and then I think it struck me, a few months being there, like I don't know if I can do what I think the gospel demands of me.
Hmm.
Um, this is a really hard and lonely life. You know, street preaching every week, protesting at abortion clinics every week, or every other week.
Now, was this the practice of that group, or was this the
Yeah,
practice that you had just sort of said, this is the Christian life?
both. I mean, I was there because I believed in it. I think that my modus operandi would have been a little different, if I
Okay.
weren't, I wasn't opposed to street preaching and I wasn't opposed to protesting, but it felt like they were doing it without tact. They were doing it just impulsively, or compulsively rather. So, um, yeah, I don't know.
Hmm.
Um,
But this begins to dawn on you that
so I mean, to give a little bit of context, like my roommate, he was a really awesome Frenchman named Pierre, kind of the quintessential Frenchman in my mind. Uh, the slick back hair and the turtlenecks, and he was great. He was a monk. I mean, like the quintessential modern monk. I've never met anyone more austere than this man. Um, he did not watch television on principle. He did not watch YouTube videos. He did not listen to music, worship music or otherwise, ever. All he did, all he did was read the Bible and listen to sermons and pray. So, his ritual was like every night for probably an hour in our tiny little apartment in Rotterdam, he would just lock himself in his bedroom and you would hear him switch back and forth between French, English, and tongues. So he'd be like, "Oh God, bring up revival to America. Oh God, please cast out the demons that are tormenting this place. Oh, and and I mean, that was just his whole world every single night.
Yeah.
Um, Whenever we would do sound checks at the church, I would be like, "Hey, Pierre, James chapter 3, verse 4. Brothers and sisters, I tell unto you, do not but disbelieve the photo." And he would just recite it verbatim. Um, and it's like, man, if this stuff is true, this is how you ought to live. And anything short of that is hypocrisy. I don't know where this quote comes from, but I always heard this quote like, allegedly from an atheist, if I believed what you Christians believed, I would crawl on my hands and knees through glass to tell people about it.
Wow.
And I think that that's accurate. So
And he somehow in his mind thought crawling through glass would be an effective evangelism technique, but we'll let that go.
fair.
Well, the point taken. We understand what he means.
Honestly, with some of these modern art exhibits and as weird as they are and how viral they go, who's to say, man? Gosh.
Well, if you do read church history, you will find a lot of strange things. So, crawling through glass, I've never read, but people have done pretty dramatic, painful, bloody things. So,
You're not
fair
wrong.
enough. So you're watching your roommate do this, and you're comparing yourself to him. Like again, I mean, because you probably were the preeminent. I mean, Jesus would look down and see your little church or your little high school and say, Satan would come by and God would say, "Have you considered my servant Jared?" And
I've
then
never,
you go to the fire school and it's like, "Oh." And then you go to Rotterdam and you meet your roommate and you're like, "Oh."
yeah. Well, I mean, so I think in my mind, the emphasis isn't like, oh man, I'm not as strong of a Christian as I thought I was. I think rather it's like I'm seeing examples of how the Christian life ought to be lived
Hmm.
if it's true. And I'm being a hypocrite if I'm not doing something similar or something comparable. Everyone's walk is going to look different. That's totally fair. But there's a sense of urgency to it. If heaven and hell are on the line and every conversation has an impact on that, then it deserves to be taken seriously. Um,
Which is, there you go. That's
yeah,
nobody's going to argue with that. Or
no,
at least
no,
anybody within the frame, they're not going to argue with that. Deserves to
yeah,
be taken seriously. You're not going to get a preacher to argue with that.
right, right. So I think that I was still a Christian in Rotterdam. I still believed, but I think that the first fault line of the crack in my faith appeared in Rotterdam. Um, and it's hard, man, being abroad and missing your friends and
Yeah.
family and just feeling so alone and
Yeah.
isolated. And that was hard. Um, so I came home from the Netherlands, a little disillusioned, a little hurt. And it's like, okay, I graduated from Fire, got my degree from there, which was worthless because it was a non-accredited institution. Um, I wouldn't trade it for anything, right? I mean, those experiences made me the man that I am today, and I'm
Yeah.
grateful.
Yeah. Oh, here comes your
Um,
timer.
oh, there we go. Cool. So, um, so after Fire, I needed a degree, needed to go to big boy school. So I ended up going to Wheaton College, the place that in my
Oh,
mind earlier was like, oh, I would never go there. That's where fake pseudo Christians who only have like an idea of God but no real passion go. And so then I went to Wheaton, and freshman, sophomore year, it was good, but I was still in a lot of duress spiritually and emotionally, just dealing with, really wrestling through how then shall we live, right? And the more I studied apologetics, I started to see through some of the arguments. The deeper I got into those studies, it's like, well, did Peter really write Second Peter? Um, how historical is the Gospel of John and the quotations of Jesus in it? There were problems. Um, and so all of those things, kind of came to a head in between sophomore and junior year at Wheaton. So I would have been 23 at the time. And it just felt like, my world was crashing down on me. Felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me, and the nihilism that I had been running from for 10 years at this point, it just felt like it was engulfing me, right? I mean, it's like,
mm,
shit, if this isn't true, that's
mm,
the only other game in town. And I really, really don't want that to be the case.
mm.
And then finally, it just sank in like, yeah, I don't want that to be the case, but maybe it just is.
Mm.
I really want God to be real. I really want Jesus to be the risen Lord who is coming back again, but maybe it's not true.
So
And
did you
that's
quit
hard.
Wheaton at that point, or
No, no. So I deconverted at 23 between sophomore and junior year, and then I re-enrolled um, the semester after, and I graduated from Wheaton, and I'm damn proud and damn happy that I stayed.
what'd you get a degree in?
Theological heavy metal music.
I didn't know they offered such things.
I didn't either, which I was the first person in human history to get one of those. So I started at Wheaton because I wanted to be a linguistics scholar. I wanted to study ancient languages. So, I got through freshman and sophomore year and was like, I want to study Greek and do exegesis and blah, blah, blah. And I got halfway through and I was like, I'm fucked, man. I do not have the brain for this. You got to be,
Yeah,
one direction for
it's
your
got to
whole
be
life.
your bag if you do that.
Yeah. And I didn't have the brain power for that. So I needed to pivot. I was like, shoot, it's too late to go into something else, and I'm too miserable to continue doing this. And then I realized, oh, Wheaton has one of the best interdisciplinary studies programs in the country.
Hmm.
Whereas other schools, they call it IDS, interdisciplinary studies. Your IDS degree at other schools is just like, oh, you're indecisive and you get a smorgasbord of everything, and voila, you got an a la carte degree. Um, and Wheaton wasn't like that. Theirs was very structured, very regimented. So you studied one thing from three different academic disciplines. So I studied um, the conversation uh, between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, centering around the sacrifice of Abraham, um,
Wow.
Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, or if you're a Muslim, Ishmael. Um, and I studied that from the perspectives of ancient languages, theology, and digital audio engineering. So Heliocentric, my band name, the school let me write an album, a metal album about, I mean, my senior project was that metal album, which I released as Heliocentric. Um, so yeah, like the thing that I handed into my professor to get my degree was an 11-song original metal album and a 93-page research paper explaining the lyrics.
Wow, it's kind of cool.
It was wild.
Yeah.
I
So when you
but
so when you so when you gave up the faith, and I'm trying to find a way to say it that is,
You can
not
say apostatized, man. You're not gonna offend me.
prejudicial. No, you seem like somebody who's not easily offended. What did your friends at Wheaton say?
They were really nice about it,
Yeah,
and I'm still very close to them. I still talk to some of my professors.
yeah,
Um, they were really wonderful, and every professor that I told was really wonderful about it.
yeah, yeah,
And I think part of the reason why I'm much softer towards Christians than a lot of my atheist counterparts is because I didn't have that experience of, leaving after having a really sour taste in my mouth. Had I left immediately after graduating from fire, I probably would be, your generic salty butthurt atheist.
yeah.
And I'm just not, because it was so wonderful being at Wheaton, being there for the 2 years where I was trying to, have the cognitive dissonance of disagreeing with my classmates and my teachers, and wrestling with scripture and with the Lord. And then after that, I could just dissociate from it. And I could say, like, yeah, these are my friends, but we're a part of two very different worlds, two very different communities. And I could just kind of step back and just appreciate them for who they were and that ideology without having to try to live it, without trying to shoehorn it into my life or figure out how I was supposed to take it and apply it. I could just say, like, yeah, these people are being consistent with their doctrine. These people are being inconsistent. This is, this is what I like about this, and this is what I dislike about it. But these are wonderful people. Um, and because I no longer considered myself a part of that community, I didn't, I wasn't pulled aside by the dude and like, hey man, like, have you been watching porn this week? Or like, have you been having enough time in your prayer closet? I didn't get that. And only a couple of times did I get into um arguments or conversations where somebody tried to Jesus juke me. Have you heard that term
No,
before?
no, I
That's
can
my favorite
understand it
thing.
though.
Like, you're having a conversation and like, oh man, what was everyone's favorite thing over the holidays? And it's like, oh, I went to my cousin's house. Oh, I went to a basketball game. Well, that's some really beautiful time with the Lord. And like in a secular context, and everyone's like, ah, it's like, you got Jesus jokes. Um,
Well, I'm not surprised by that. It's sort of a cliche out there that Christianity is this tyrannical cult that immediately when there's a defector, everybody sort of piles on and,
right.
kills your small animals and, destroys your property. But no, your experience doesn't surprise me at all, even in a very, fairly intense place like Wheaton. Do you remember, you recognize the name Tim Blackman?
Yeah, yeah, he was my chaplain the whole 4 years I was there.
Yeah, yeah. Tim's a good friend of mine. We
No way.
recruited him to plant a church out in Folsom here, and from here he went to the Netherlands and then took the job at Wheaton. So no, so I know Tim. So yeah, well,
That is
Tim
wild.
Tim might watch this. Tim might watch this. He's serving a church in Western Michigan now. So
Fair enough. Well, if you're
so
watching, Tim, I'm sure you don't remember me, but good to see you. Thanks for all
I
you
will
did, man.
I will send him this video. I'm sure he'll
Beautiful.
watch it. But so how did your parents react to this?
That was hard.
Yeah.
I think that I was a spiritual pillar in that house.
Mm,
And, I sat my parents down. I waited a year before I fully disclosed it, right before my senior year at Wheaton, and uh, took them in the bedroom. And my mom is so sweet, but she just couldn't make sense of what it was I was trying to say.
Yeah.
And I mean, she was like, so are you saying you don't think you're truly saved? Well, Jared, if your name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, then no man can snatch it out of God's hand. And then it kind of hit her, and you just saw the look on her eyes,
Mm.
that sinking look. And she was like, or are you saying you don't believe it at all? I mean, it was just so incomprehensible to her.
Yeah.
Um, and then, I remember my dad saying, I, I don't know how to talk to you anymore.
Ooh.
And oops, thank you again. Cool. Um, and it was hard. It was painful. Um, thankfully that was many years ago, and my relationship with my parents is better. They got bigger fish to fry, and
Yeah.
but it is kind of a weird place to be in where I'm, well read theologically, and I've had to explain to my parents, hey, listen, I understand that you're grieving the spiritual loss of me walking away from the faith, but hey, look on the, perk up, because there's always hope that maybe God will get a hold of me and bring me back into the fold, or I'm still young and I'm still learning and discovering, and I've told them a little bit about the church audits. And I'm like, well, listen, hey, I'm going to church every week and I'm hearing the gospel, and just keep praying for me that God will minister to my heart. But at the same time, you got to be able to trust, and you got to be able to be okay with letting the Lord minister to me in His time. It's not something that you guys need to fret and worry and terrorize over.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a
Yeah.
weird thing having to comfort your parents over your own spiritual death.
Mm. I can believe that. I can believe that. What did you do after Wheaton?
My best friend, he was a missionary to Honduras, and we kind of converted together, and then a decade later deconverted together.
Oh.
But so after he came off the mission field, he went and did a master's at NC State, and in order to keep the bromance alive, I moved out to Raleigh with him, and now I'm still living here, working as a full-time video producer,
Oh,
doing
no wonder your videos are
this stuff.
so good.
Fun fact though, it was the stupid YouTube videos that I made and the music videos that I made for my senior project that landed me the gig that I have now. So
Huh. I'm not
a liberal
surprised. That's
arts
often the way it
education,
is.
well spent. Yeah.
That's often the way it is. It's these Scott Adams wrote, I've only read one of his books, but it was basically his book about what he was about. It was basically a book about how to get ahead in life. And his point was, just when you're young, keep picking up all these skills, because you have no
Yeah.
idea what's going to be sort of available when you need something. And then, even if you got a degree in, heavy metal rock theology, you can get a job working in video, and then off you go. And you never know when the other gifts are going to come online, and you go from there.
Yeah.
So your friend group, all non-Christians or mix?
No, I would say maybe 50-50.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, Yeah, I would say my dating pool is pretty non-religious, but the friends that I hang out with and that I, go on vacations with, they're kind of all across the spectrum as far as very conservative Christians, to progressive Christians to atheists. I've got some Eastern Orthodox buddies in there. Um, yeah, so that's good.
So one of the topics that comes around on my channel often is dating. So now that you mentioned
Ah,
dating, because I talked to Home Math last month, which was quite interesting, and
who's
actually
that?
when I did so I got on YouTube. I got on YouTube to do the Freddie and Paul show, but then I was still playing with YouTube, and I made a video about Jordan Peterson, and that's where things sort of took off, and that
Hmm.
completely caught me by surprise, but then people began to find me and want to talk to me. And so I've just kind of been doing the pastor thing online and talking to people
Mm.
like we're talking now. And I still make other kinds of videos, and I still make the Freddie and Paul show, so on and so
It's
forth.
like you're
But
bringing order to a sense of chaos in the world. It's like you're
well, you,
organizing matter and ideas into a coherent worldview, hierarchy of order.
wow, you're really good.
Thank
That's
you.
that's very
Everyone in
good.
my friend group can do that in unison.
So, and that meant that I got a chance to, we started a local meetup, got a chance to
Hmm.
meet a lot of single guys, and then I hear a lot of complaining about dating. So is it as bad out there as everyone tells me it is?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to say this without sounding smug. Uh, I'm very grateful because I'm a musician. I'm articulate enough. I've made people laugh a couple times in my life, so that already puts me.
Yeah, you don't look like the kind of guy who's going to have a lot of trouble with this. But
Yeah, and
but yet you went through this fire school and Wheaton and didn't leave either one of them with a wife. And you know as well as I do that even though nobody says it, that is a primary mission of these kinds of organizations, is to
yeah,
get some equal yoking done. So and yet you didn't.
yeah, yeah. Um, so man, why didn't that happen? Huh?
Yeah, why didn't that happen?
Maybe I'm picky. Maybe I'm weird. Honestly, I think finding somebody who's as weird as me, it's gonna be a journey. So there's that.
Well, the
Um,
internet is here to help.
Shucks. Well, I just had a really good fourth date with a pretty young lady, so
Oh,
maybe that'll manifest in something. Um, I mean, I think the more interesting dating phenomenon to me is trying to figure out, my own psychology of this is totally unrelated. There was some study. It was like the Stanford fasting test or something, um, or the Stanford starvation test, something along those lines. I was listening to a podcast on it, and one of the stories from that really struck me was there was a guy who lost like something crazy, 30% of his body weight, on this starvation test, and was just given barely enough calories to scrape by for this study. And the effects of that were lifelong on him,
hmm.
where, he had long standing food deprivation. And the aftermath of that was he couldn't drive his car unless he had candy under the driver's seat. He always had to have candy nearby. And
Interesting.
that I wonder if there's something similar going on there, with me and with sex, because I was very good at depriving myself from any sexual gratification for the 10 years um, that I was a believer. Um, like when I say that I went 7 years without masturbating, I mean 7 years, not a single time. And I've never met anyone who's been able to do that. Um, it was to the extent where I would go to the gym and not wear my glasses or my contacts because I didn't want to be able to physically see other women in the gym working out.
Wow.
Um, I mean, it was ridiculous. So that was then, and I think there's a part of me now that feels like afraid of even going without, or having to deprive myself again.
Hmm.
Um, So it's a weird thing. And I can fully acknowledge like, oh, well, this might not be beneficial in the long term. And I'm not really sure what the solution is. I'd be interested to um, talk to a clinician or somebody who
Yeah.
has expertise in this field. If you were a drug addict for 10 minutes and then sober for 10 years and then you relapse, what is the What's the game plan after that? And I don't really know. Currently I don't think it's negatively affecting my life in any real sense. I'm thriving, but I can see the long-term implications, and it's like, yeah, this might be problematic in the future for a marriage.
Hmm. Hmm.
So,
That's interesting. I don't have any insight to give you on that.
eh,
Usually,
psychiatrists are expensive, man.
a lot of people look to pastors for free. They want free therapy. It's like, I don't do therapy. I'm a pastor. You can't
Yeah,
get therapy. Go to someone who's got a thing hanging on their wall that talks about that stuff or those things. Talk to me about other things. So,
yeah, yeah.
so what are there any Christian things in your life that you think, besides this one that you just named, do you think you sort of weirdly stuck with you, even if now you can't understand why you're doing it?
I love the gospel of Jesus Christ,
Because that
and
comes
I'm
through in your videos. I mean, I listen to your videos
yeah.
sometimes. It's like, boy, this guy's interesting in this.
Do you know who Elaine Pagels is?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast with her this morning,
It was
and
the
it
Alex
sounds
O'Connor podcast.
yeah.
Yeah, I haven't
I've got a
listened to it
fat
yet, but I saw she was on. I thought, oh, that's interesting.
I've got a fat friend crush on him, man. I want nothing more than to, grab a pint with him at a pub, and like life goal will be accomplished if I ever meet him. Um but so, it sounds like she has a fat crush on some of the Gnostic texts. And
That's for a
I
long time.
yeah, yeah. Um then props to her, she's the Gnostic queen.
Yeah.
uh and I think that I have a crush on the the Christian mythos.
Hmm.
um I think it's beautiful. I think the Trinity is complicated and elegant, and I think the plan of salvation makes sense. um there's baggage, right? There's a lot of things that I would change, if I could write my own religion. um but a lot of the things that are kind of hangups for atheists or secularists just really aren't for me. For me, it just boils down to the fact that I don't think it's historically true, and it bums me out. But I take Paul seriously in 1 Corinthians 15, that if the dead are not raised, then we of all men are most to be pitied. If the dead are not raised, if Christ has not bodily resurrected from the dead, then this religion is not worth pursuing.
Hmm.
I take him seriously at that. And I think he's right. And the reason why I don't call myself, I don't know, I don't know what the term for it is. I mean, I guess it's kind of like Christian liberal now, if you believe that the story of Christianity is largely mythological. Um, Not the mythicist movement. I don't
Yeah.
know. But it's like I have too much respect for Christianity as a world religion to bastardize it like that,
Yeah.
and say like, well, I like some of these teachings of Jesus, and do unto others, and the 99 and the one, like those are good concepts. I'm going to take those and choose those, and that just seems really contrived and disingenuous to me. So I made a decision early on. I'm not going to deconstruct. I'm going to deconvert. And that's usually my message to to Christians is either believe or deconvert. But I just don't know. Like I don't see the sense in trying to shoehorn Jesus into an ideology that he just wasn't a part of. Um,
So what does deconverting mean then to you?
well, I mean, I'm an atheist.
Yeah, but so now you get to have sex.
Well,
Maybe if
so
whether or not you're doing it. Oh, there's your timer again.
oh, there we go.
Um, but it's, boy, this is because I've been, I watch your church things and I'm
Mhm.
fascinated by them. And I think now I am getting to understand why I'm fascinated by them, because and this is super interesting to me because so I start making these videos. Jordan Peterson does this biblical series, and it's like, I know something about the Bible. I preach about the Bible every week. I'm going to
Mhm.
talk a little bit about what he's doing and my questions about it. And then I do that. And then people start finding their way to my door and wanting to talk to me about it. I knew that when Jordan Peterson started this thing, everybody was going to want to talk about this. And I had this whole group of dudes that are like, I tried talking to my wife about this, and she was like, I don't want to talk about this. Then I talked to Christian ministers and said, have you seen that Jordan Peterson stuff? What, the guy like 2-hour videos? I don't have time for that. I've got a church to run. And so I'm finding all of these people, and I'm thinking, I want to talk to people. What's going on with this Jordan Peterson thing? And then I just, if you go back in my back catalog, you can find what, again, we call these Randos conversations, where people who are from around the world, they found Jordan Peterson. I made a video. They found me. They couldn't talk to Jordan Peterson. I was a pastor. And so they just kind of thought, well, maybe he'll talk to me. And so then I start talking to them. And then I'm talking to them offline. And it's like, gosh, everybody's got kind of the same questions. And so then with some appropriate ones, can we record this? And can I share it?
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
then I did that. Even more started coming. It was
Yeah.
kind of like the sixth sense, but these weren't dead people finding me. And
Well, maybe they were emotionally dead for a minute,
well, and so what
got
you
resurrected by the
well, what you
by the
say
good
is so
news.
interesting, because now, I mean, this is exactly what Alex O'Connor said. If you look up the conversation he had with Elizabeth Old, I just, before talking to you, finished a video
Hmm.
about that conversation and Jordan Peterson and Pints with Aquinas,
Gotcha.
because I have talked to so then a lot of Jordan Peterson people start finding my channel and listening to me, and so many of them come to me and they'll say things like, I so want to believe. This is exactly what Alex
Hmm.
O'Connor says in that video. I
Yeah.
want to believe, but I just don't believe it's, and then I'll flesh it out. It's historically correspondent with facts on the ground in
Right. Right.
Judea 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's kind of where I am. Um, it's like I have very, very complicated views with Jordan Peterson. I love a lot of the stuff that he does and has done. And I mean, truthfully, when I had my dark night of the soul at 23, he probably kept me from blowing my brains out. He was the first person that like, so I mean, full disclosure, and we can get to this in a minute. I consider myself a nihilist. I reject objective morality. I object objective worth and value and meaning. Um, but all that being said, his basic message of like, just try to get your shit together, man, and it will be better for you. I was like, okay, so let me just let me just get some Zoloft, have some sex, clean my room, and we'll see how we feel after that. And we still want to kill ourselves, we can do it next week. But and that was very helpful. So, I owe him a lot. That being said, with his methodology, um, how do you say it? For unearthing meaning in ancient myth, it feels a little, how do I say that? I want to be charitable. I don't want to be a dick.
It should be.
Um,
He's honest. He says you should say exactly what you think. Just so say exactly what you think.
it
He'll
feels
not. He'll probably not listen to us. Outside chance he might, but he and
sure.
we know each other. We've had conversations, but I
Mhm.
wouldn't say, he doesn't show up at my house every time. Well, he doesn't come to California much anymore. But so anyway,
For
speak your
sure.
mind, please.
I would say that sometimes his mythological interpretations feel a little ad hoc. Um, so, at best, they feel ad hoc. Um, take for example, he's got his analysis of Peter Pan, and he says Peter Pan is like the boy who refuses to grow up. He's an immature child, and he surrounds himself with these losers. The lost boys. And then Wendy, this beautiful woman, comes along, and he wants to go off to Never Ever Land and never grow up. Um, and my frustration is like, yeah, but how? what makes you think that is the correct interpretation?
Hmm.
It is an interpretation, but he never talks about like, well, I went and asked the author. That's never part of his analysis. Instead, it's like, well, I've plumbed the depths of it, and I've discovered the, I don't know, the secret meaning of this text, almost like he's got, secret gnosis. And so imagine the same Peter Pan story, except, you could flip that whole thing and say, well, no, Peter Pan represents Christ, and Never Ever Land represents the eternal kingdom of God. And, the Lost Boys are actually his 12 disciples. And then, what's her name? Mary? No, what's the girl's name? Wendy. Like Wendy is the possible recipient of salvation. She's the investigator. And
She's the Virgin Mary. Come on.
You're right. Shoot. But case in point, it's like, who wins out there? What is the deeper, truer meaning? And it's like, well, it feels kind of ad hoc. And so if you start reading the biblical analyses that way, or you start analyzing the biblical corpus that way, it's like, well, does Jesus represent goodness and virtue and light? Or was it like, or is it like the Gnostics said, and that Jesus represents divine wisdom, and he represents the contrast to the physical world and freedom from the physical world. And it's like, who wins out there? And so I don't like that frame of analysis, because it seems to rely on, I don't know, personal preference, maybe. I feel like that's being way too harsh. And again, I like a lot
It's
of
a
Jordan
common
Peterson's stuff,
criticism.
but
Alex O'Connor makes exactly that criticism in a number of
okay.
places. So it's, I think it's a fair challenge. It's just the thing that strikes me though is the irony that sort of part of what develops after, because Luther sort of has this view that, well, with the text of the Bible and reason, upon that basis, we can all get on the same page. We put away Jerome because Jerome was filling stuff in. So now we have better texts of the Bible. And then of course, after Luther, the church sort of fragments. And so then after, so Luther was sort of the pinnacle of the turn to the text that happens in Renaissance humanism. And everybody takes Latin names and they're, looking for texts and learning Latin and everything and trying to ape Cicero. But then after that, of course, you move into, well, we need some kind of way to establish certainty. And so we're going to a la Galileo, these spheres fall at the same time from a tower. So we can either use like pure reason or empiricism. And if we can somehow draw lines to physical correspondence, then we can achieve certainty. But it's super interesting that for many, that move has landed them in nihilism, because what happened, what I was so surprised by, I didn't see any of this coming. I was just this local pastor who thought Jordan Peterson was interesting and wanted to talk about it a little bit, and then suddenly I'm playing Sixth Sense and I see dead people everywhere and they want to have conversations with me. And there's going to be a reaction to that on this video. I know there is. Anyway, so, and then I start talking to these guys who were seriously depressed, and they start telling me that watching, 30, 40, 50, 100 hours of Jordan Peterson, they felt better.
Yeah.
And I thought,
yeah.
That's really interesting. I never would have surprised, I never would have guessed that, but it is just a deep irony that and of course then John Vervaeke is another guy associated with this and everything, but it's just really interesting how that quest for certainty drove a lot of people into nihilism, which is just an interesting thing. So, well, you're a nihilist who is not, you don't seem to be, I don't know how you are in the evening after a hard day of video editing, but you seem to be fairly cheery. You don't seem to be depressed.
No, and I think the bulk of nihilism hit me at 23, and it's been kind of an upward journey since then. So I kind of I'm still looking for the proper vocabulary to describe what it is I think and feel.
Hmm.
Because on the one hand, I believe that you're worthless. I believe that you have no inherent value or worth, period, end of story. I don't believe in right and wrong or good and evil. I don't believe that murder is wrong, rape, pillage, and plunder are wrong. Um, at the same time, I really love people. At the same time, I really want to make you smile. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and I choose to live my life that way because it makes me happy,
yeah.
because it makes me happy when the people around me are happy. And even though I believe at a cognitive level that you don't have any worth, in my heart, like, man, you're worth more than the world.
Yeah.
And I think that I hold those in tandem, that I almost have like an illusory sense of morality. Um, and people, I feel like I've heard Jordan Peterson say, like, well, you can't be a nihilist because if you were truly a nihilist, you would go around and machine gun everyone down. And one of my friends asked me this. I
Yeah.
remember we were in Arkansas, and we were hanging out with our buddy for his bachelor party, and um, Josh turns to me and he's like, Jared, if you're a nihilist, why don't you just go outside and just pick up a gun and just start shooting people? Why don't you just mow down a school? I said, because I don't want to. And I really don't like that. That's why I'm not an advocate for nihilism. I'm not a
When you say
event.
you really don't like that, what do you mean?
I don't like that that's the only thing that's barring me from doing that.
Oh,
I don't have a sense of like, oh, well, I ought not to do it because it's the wrong thing to do. And for people who aren't privy to this conversation, their immediate reaction is like, but it would hurt people, but it would cause suffering, it would
right,
cause
right,
pain.
right, right.
And the nihilist's response is, yes, but why objectively is that wrong? Why is it worse that we do that to people or kids, or than to do it to worms or animals or dirt? Um, where is the yardstick that determines the worth and value of a human versus an animal? So I don't like the fact that I think it is the case that humans don't have innate worth. I don't like the fact that the only thing that dictates that a certain, act, homicide, genocide, infanticide, is wrong, is that it's my personal preference. I think that is the case, and it bums me out. And for me, I think it's fine, because, I don't see a world in which I just one day wake up and want to start killing people. I don't
Yeah,
think that's in the cards.
yeah, yeah.
Um, it makes me uncomfortable that I don't have a framework to damn people. It makes me uncomfortable that I can't look somebody in the eye, a John Wayne Gacy, and say, you're a bastard and you've done something objectively wrong.
Hmm.
I wish I could. I wish I could say, you're worse than all these other people. You're worse than the saints in the church. You're worse than the praying ladies. But I don't have any sense of hierarchy. Ultimately, in my mind, it comes down to majority rule, which feels awfully fascistic, feels awfully dictatorial. It feels very might makes right. Um, and I wish that weren't the case, but I think, unfortunately, tragically, it is. And so to all the young men who are coming to you and saying, hey, I listened to 50 hours of Jordan Peterson, and now I don't want to blow my brains out. Please, for the love of God, keep listening to Jordan Peterson and don't listen to me. Um, this is a really uncomfortable philosophy. It is a deeply unsettling ideology that I don't wish upon anyone. And giving up the idea of innate human worth and objective morality is painful, it's gross, it's detestable. Um, but I only believe it because I think it's true.
Wow. Well, I'm glad, and just on a strictly psychological basis, you were formed by Christian parents
Mhm.
who believe objectively
Mhm.
that people have human worth, and they
Yeah.
treated you, even even their even their tears and the difficulty they had when you came out to them shows that it's love. They love you. And of course,
Yeah.
that is formed in them by this mythos that they
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
received and they have embraced. Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for I really appreciate your honesty. And and again, that's part of the reason I wanted to talk to you, because it does come out in your videos. And there's a weird dynamic where, and I'm sure you've seen this, there's a weird dynamic of duplicity that tends to arise in especially intense Christian communities. You said it earlier that you were the only kid in the youth group that didn't get pregnant or impregnate somebody.
Mhm. Mhm.
I assumed that there were other guys in the youth groups. I assumed they didn't get pregnant, but I understood. Um, and there's a weird duplicity in intense Christian communities where they bear the mythos that talks about value, but then they do all of these other things that undercut and undermine the value, and that's basically what sin is. They
Right.
gossip,
Right.
they cheat, they lie, they don't take it seriously. And you took it seriously through great effort and cost. I mean, you thought you didn't maybe think in these terms, but you were a monk until you met even more intense monk.
A monkier monk.
Yeah, that's right. And but it's also the case that, and that's obviously the part of the, well, when Jordan Peterson says to Sam Harris, you believe in God because you're not out there raping and killing, you're not a real nihilist.
Right. Right.
Jordan Peterson's obviously a good enough psychologist to understand that, and he says it all the time. We are not transparent to ourselves, and for civilizationally, we have all of this formation that even though ostensibly you can be a very philosophical nihilist, your these Christian habits of loving people and valuing them and not wanting to hurt them, they've been built into you by your parents and by your society and by your community, that even though you reject it, and I mean, you even said you still love the mythos. So
Mhm.
how did the atheist church audits come about? What how did that happen?
That was that long predates my deconversion. I think I was probably 18 at the time, and I just realized, like, man, there are so many churches in my tiny little hometown of 3,000 people, and I'm never going to go into any of them. And most people are never going to go into any of them. And that just kind of bugs me. It's like, you speculate about what other Christians are thinking and doing, but you have no idea. You've never listened to their sermons. And so there was that. And then eventually it became a means of evangelism where I realized, I was smart enough early on to realize that, like, it's one thing if you tell somebody, "Oh man, you should really read the Book of John. You should read this." And it's like, okay, well, that's less effective than saying, "Hey, listen, man, how about we do a book swap? I'll read something that you want me to read if you'll read something that I want you to read." And so, I would be like, "Hey, yeah, I'll read the Kama Sutra if you read, the first book of John, or the book of First John." Um, like
The
whatever.
monk reads the Kama Sutra.
Uh,
Lord, steal me.
so so it was that. And then, when I was 19, I had a Muslim from Syria invite me to his mosque. And I was like, if I want to know how to effectively evangelize to these people, effectively preach the gospel to them, then yeah, let me go to his mosque. Let me go see what they do. And it just so humanized them to me. And I remember sitting as they're doing the prayers in this renovated Baptist church. It was so funny. It was a straight up Baptist church. And they had just yanked the rug out and they had replaced the rug with like a rug that had lines in it so that they could see which way was east, but it was totally off center from the direction of the building. So, like here's the steeple, here's the pulpit, and then all the lines were like zigzagged because they all face, kind of between the
Right.
pulpit and the second
They should
window.
have bought an unused Orthodox church. At least it would have been oriented some way. The Baptists, they'll point their church in any direction.
The nerve, the nerve. When will these architects learn? But so I went to his mosque um and I just kind of got a kick out of that. Then this is funny. You're the first person I've gotten to tell this story to. I really got intrigued by just kind of like cults and culty organizations. So I tried to go to a Nation of Islam mosque. The
Oh,
Yeah. So
oh,
just imagine a dumbass 19-year-old white kid.
oh.
And man,
You
I was
had
so
no
ready.
idea what you were doing.
None. So I donned a suit, I had done my research and I pull up, to the 10 a.m. I don't know, prayer service or whatever. And I walk up to the door and there's this big bouncer dude with blue blocker glasses. And he opens the door for me. And then what they call him, pastor, imam, he comes out. He's like, "Hey, just give us 1 second, man." He slams the door on me. And I'm like, okay. So I wait outside for 10 minutes. And the guy comes out. He's like, "Hey, man, let me steal it really quick. Hey, listen, I got to be honest with you, man. We've never had this happen before. We've never had a young white man try to enter our service before." And I was like, "Yeah, man, I'm just here, curious about the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, and I'm here to listen and learn." And he's like, "Oh, well, thank you for doing that, man. Hey, but listen, we're not gonna let you in here today. Now, listen, I don't want you to think that it's because I hate white people. If I hated white people, I'd tell you to get the hell off my stoop. But I'm not saying that. Listen, all I'm saying is that if we let you in here, the people are going to be thinking more about what you're thinking about rather than what the preacher's preaching about. So we're not going to let you in." And I am so proud to be able to say that I am one of the only white people in America who has been denied access to a religious community based on my race. It is, I take so much pride in it.
That is so funny. So my father, I'm a third generation minister. My father
Okay.
pastored a church, sort of turned a salvation soup ministry into a church in an African American community on the East Coast, just outside of New York City.
Wow.
And so then I went to, during the civil rights movement, this is obviously a big deal. Church was, 80, 90% black.
Hmm.
So that's how I grew up. And so of course, the Nation of Islam and, you know, Malcolm X, all of this history I know. And one day I'm sitting, so my church is in a extremely diverse area of Sacramento.
Hmm.
And it used to be, that the parking lot was completely open. And I come out of church one day, and there was a politician running for office, and he must have had a connection with the Nation of Islam, because he basically got them to canvass for him, and they decided they would all park their cars in our parking lot. And so, given the neighborhood, they probably just assumed it was a black church. So I come out of the office, and here's the Nation of Islam in my parking lot. They look at me and I look at them. I know exactly who they are. And the politician just kind of comes up. He's not Nation of Islam. He's like, "Oh, Pastor, we're just kind of canvassing the neighborhood for my thing. And is it okay if you use my parking lot?" I said, "Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. No problem." But they got out of there. It's like, we are not going to. I would. Oh, to have a video camera there when you show up at that, it's just too funny. Oh, it is just yeah. Anybody, there's some great biographies of Malcolm X out there. I think I read one that won a Pulitzer Prize. It's a Elijah Muhammad, Nation of Islam, completely apart from all kinds of other things. It's just, everybody's all bent out of shape about Christian nationalism or white nationalism. Well, there's black nationalism in America too. There
Yeah,
is the Nation of Islam, and it's a crazy world. So
it,
you just started visiting churches and doing this, and this sounds like you at some point then you just decided on your YouTube channel you would make some videos about it.
yeah. So I mean, I yeah, I was looking for a good avenue to like consistently talk about faith, right? Because so backing up a little bit, my whole YouTube channel, when I came on the scene and started releasing music, the way that most people on the internet knew about me was from the music, most of which I had made at Wheaton for my senior project. And so I released that, and kind of like halfway, it was weird because it was Christian music. If you listen to my most recent album, Ishmael, it is a Christian album.
Hmm.
It is very heavily influenced. I don't know. The entire thing is praising the concept of human sacrifice in the form of Christ. You know, um, it's hailing the sacrifice of Isaac slash Ishmael as a foreshadowing of Christ. So it's a deeply Christian album. And I was kind of in a weird spot where it's like, I don't know if I should tell everyone that I'm an atheist or not. So finally I did. And so it's like, hey, I'm an atheist, but I have some Christian music out. So there's that. And then it's like, oh man, I really want to like, the music is fun and I still want to pursue that and do that the best I can. But I have a lot of fun doing this and talking about my thoughts on religion and spirituality. Um, so yeah, I was going on Instagram and making like Instagram reels just about like, what's up, guys? Your favorite atheist here. And this morning I went to a Baptist church, and Zooey Mama, he was on one this morning because he said this crazy thing, and let me tell you about it. And then I realized like, oh man, I'm a video producer. I need to do it better. So started making bona fide YouTube videos, and I was kind of surprised at how quickly they've started to catch on. And I'm really excited.
Huh.
It's been a
Interesting.
hoop.
Interesting. Well, we can before we turn off the recording, I don't know if there's anything you want to ask me while we're still recording. Otherwise, we can turn off the recording and you can ask me whatever you want to.
Paul, who the hell are you?
Oh gosh, I got a few videos out there. I don't know if you saw just how big my back catalog is. I'm very mouthy.
Hmm.
I was, like I said, I'm third generation. So have you ever heard of the Christian Reformed Church?
Yes,
Oh, really?
I believe
Oh,
so. Yeah.
well, you're in Wheaton, of course. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Not a lot
I
in
mean,
North
I don't
Carolina, but
know. I don't know who they split from. I mean, I don't know if they were part of the Dutch Reformed Church or if
yes.
that split from. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. They came over in the 19th century, and the Reformed Church in America was here all the way from the colonial period. And the Dutch immigrants came over and saw all of these people had been in the country for a couple of centuries, and they said they don't believe what we believe.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
allow lodge membership in their church. We don't do that. So
Mm.
they split, and they kept worshiping in Dutch until the First World War, when Deutsch and Dutch sound a lot, and there was a lot of anti-German sentiment. And so, in fact, one
Ah,
church in Iowa got burned down, and suddenly the Christian Reformed Church, all these Dutchmen start speaking English, and because they don't want to get confused with the Germans. So
damn.
it's a it's a Dutch Reformed denomination.
Okay.
Two major waves of immigration before the First World War and after the Second World War, and my family were actually Jews on my father's
Hmm.
side who left the Netherlands. I think my grandfather married a Dutch girl instead of a Jewish girl, so got
Hmm.
kicked out of the community. So decided to just mingle with the Dutch. And so my grandfather was a minister, and then my father was a minister, and then I'm a minister. I went to the Dominican Republic right after Calvin Seminary, went to Calvin College, Calvin
Hmm.
Seminary,
Nice.
the other
Nice.
Wheaton. And
You hung out with Alvin Plantinga, huh?
yeah, Alvin, his younger brother Neil was my
Hmm.
theology professor at Calvin Seminary.
No way. Okay.
CRC is a very a lot of family networks in the Christian Reformed Church.
Hmm. Gotcha.
So and yeah, but my father, my father took a church in Paterson, New Jersey, that had sort of been this little rescue mission thing that the Dutch CRCs, the Dutchmen are sort of moving out of Paterson after the Second World War, going out to the suburbs, and African Americans were living in those old neighborhoods, and so they decided to start a ministry to the African Americans. And then by 1960, the churches were like, well, it should probably be a church and not just a mission. So my father
Yeah,
was right out of seminary, and he stayed there 36 years and did that ministry. And that's where
that
I
is
grew up.
wild.
And yeah, and so then then I was in the Dominican Republic for about 7 years, and then took a little church in Sacramento that had also been sort of a racial reconciliation church, planted, about in the late 60s. And
In the Dominican Republic?
no, here in
Here, okay.
Sacramento. And the first home missionary that was here, um, the Dutch people, the way Christian Reformed churches used to be planted, they'd go into a city and they'd look for all the Dutch names in the phone book and call them and ask them if they wanted to go to a Christian Reformed church. That's seriously how they did it. But
Wow.
he found that there were, at that point in 1960, redlining was just ending, and African Americans were starting to buy the houses in this area that at this point was sort of a growing suburb of the city of Sacramento, a lot of state
Right. Yeah.
workers. So then this church very quickly became a fairly integrated church in terms of, at Sacramento, though, it's not just black and white, it's a lot of Asian, Hispanic. So this is a tremendously diverse neighborhood. And then when I left the Dominican Republic, there were a couple of churches that were interested in me. But this one, given my background, both as a foreign missionary and also my background growing up with my father's church, this church fit very well in terms of how I'm wired. And the church reached its peak in the 80s and has sort of been in decline ever since. And at this point, we're just about, if it hadn't been for my YouTube channel and the generosity of some people who watch my channel and actually support my local church because of it, the church probably would have been closed. And like I said, so if you go on my channel, you can look for the Freddie and Paul Show. That's how I got my start on YouTube. Well, I got my start on YouTube because some people couldn't make church, and YouTube used to have or Google had Google Hangouts. And so there would be people who would miss a service. And so I do Google Hangouts, but then I would notice some people would be shopping. I'd be on their phone and their face would be so you can find sermons like that. And then Freddie in the church says to me one day, he had been a mook on a shock jock radio program in Sacramento, who left town. And he says, Pastor Paul, why don't you and me do a TV program? It's I says, tell you what, Freddie, because I take him out to lunch every month or so. And I said,
Yeah.
well, we'll just make little videos on my smartphone and I'll post them on YouTube so he can watch us on YouTube. That's what Freddie and Paul Show started. And then Jordan Peterson came along, and I thought, because I was noticing, this was back before Jordan had too many subscribers, I was noticing that a lot of people in Reddit statements were saying things like, yeah, I never thought anything about the Bible or any of this stuff, but Jordan Peterson's kind of making me want to know more. And I thought, I'd seen a lot of people deconstruct and go to New Age or something like this. I'd seen everybody walk down that
Yeah.
road, and I hadn't seen
Yeah.
a lot of people walk back. And because of Jordan Peterson, people were walking back. And so then it's
Yeah.
I got to figure out what's going on with this guy. So then I start watching his videos, and then I start trying to think about him. And then I find that a whole bunch of people are watching and sort of frustrated that they can't talk about it. So then I start a meetup, and things have just kept going from there. And that then grew into, I had conversations with Jonathan Peugeot, who's a friend of Jordan's. I had conversations with John Vervaeke, who was a colleague of Jordan's at University of Toronto, developed relationships with them. And then the people following me just continued to grow. And that's where this little corner of the internet got started, where Jonathan Peugeot, it's, a lot of people who are just really interested in orthodoxy. And with John Vervaeke, it's a lot of people who are sort of more post-Christian, cognitive science, this kind of thing. And around me was a lot of people who were just really all over the place, people who had deconstructed, people who are halfway reconstructing. people who would like to be Christians but can't believe it. And then people around me they just began doing what I did. So my YouTube channel inspired a lot of other YouTube channels.
Yeah. Yeah.
And me doing conversations with people started them doing conversations with people. And we've done some in real life events. And so and then also I was always frustrated. So I'm on a church in a corner in a very distressed part of town. This was a suburban area, but in California, the suburbs keep moving out. And
Right.
then this area of town was sort of taken over by like group homes, and the property values collapsed. And so it's a lot of homeless people. So it's a
Mm.
fairly distressed area of town. And so I'm just always dealing with the homeless people and people needing money for this. I was very used to that because that's what my father dealt with in Patterson.
Right.
But I was always a little frustrated because it's like everybody comes to the church because they need $20 for gas or, $1,000 for rent or something like that. Nobody wants to come to the church to talk about what all the church people come here to talk about. And I was a little
Mm.
frustrated by that. And then I make a video about Jordan Peterson, and suddenly everybody wants to talk about the Bible and Jesus and religion and stuff. And it's like,
Yeah.
that isn't happening on my doorstep. But I also knew that in many churches, you lose status if you ask critical questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was noticing that in my Jordan Peterson meetup, I was having the kinds of conversations that I had always wanted to have in church, where people could say
Hmm.
things like, I don't believe any of this stuff, but I think this. Whereas in
Yeah.
Bible study, people will tend to be, if I say something, I want it to be right. I don't want to lose status in the eyes of my friends.
Right.
So
Right.
myself and a friend of mine from Southern California, John Van Donk, we were running the meetups, and then people were pestering me because I'd been on YouTube for a couple of years, and they're like, well, what's Paul really about? I mean, he's talking to people, he's got a channel. Surely at some point there's going to be the big reveal, and it's going to be the PVK show, and we'll have, I don't know, is it going to be a Billy Graham thing? Or are we going to have dancing girls or what? I don't know. So people keep pestering me because I talk to anybody who wants to, randos on the internet. And
Yeah.
so so some people were pushing me, and I finally said they needed something. So I told them a word that always had an image in my mind, which was estuary, which was a place
Where's my
where,
dictionary?
yeah, it's a place. Well, I live in California. There's all sorts of estuaries. The water comes from the mountains and it meets the ocean. And so you have tidal pools, you have, and you have harbor seals. And so it's a
Hmm.
saltwater and freshwater mix. And it's an extremely
Mm.
fertile, fascinating, life-giving environment. And so I said, I want there to be estuaries that are church adjacent. They're not in the church. And so at that point, Jordan Peterson was sick, and so he was sort of off the map. And
Right.
so John Van Donk and I pivoted, and we started these estuary groups. And then we have this estuary protocol where one of the hard things for me was we don't open in prayer, and we don't close in prayer. We don't do that because that's what, this is not a Bible study.
Yeah.
And we basically developed a way that we could have a conversation with people from any background and
Yeah.
have a reliable chance that we can have a really satisfying, productive conversation together.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I've been helping to start these groups all around the world for the last few years. So we've got them in Europe and the UK and Canada and the US and Australia and the
Wow.
Netherlands and Germany. And because and that's probably why the algorithm served up your video, because it's a lot of people who they're sort of a little Christianity curious. They've got issues they can't believe. They're
Sure.
unlike you. They're
Sure.
probably not going to go to church.
Mm.
If they tried to join a church, at least any church that had any kind of any kind of requirement, like believing in Jesus, something like that, they would never be able to join a church. But
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
want community, and they want to be able to talk about meaningful things.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
actually, last year, I love doing my adult Bible study, and there's plenty of videos on my channel of me doing it, but my church is just getting smaller and smaller of sort of people of that Christian ilk. And so I talked to my council and we pivoted and we said, we're going to do estuary meetings every Sunday morning at 9 a.m. And we get a lot more people come to the estuary meetings than came to the Sunday school. And some people, they just come to the estuary meetings. They don't come to church at all. They don't have any faith in Christ or anything like that. But they got questions. And basically in an estuary meeting, you can talk about just about anything. And as long as the group itself wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so, and that's been great. And I've run these meetings in the UK and Germany and the Netherlands, all over the world. And, you know, that it really works well. So that's what I do. And, you know, I keep pastoring as long as the church is open, which, you know,
Yeah.
every year it's kind of like, will this be the year? I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. So, but then I keep doing the YouTube thing and take it a year at a time. That's all I do. And then, of course, you kind of came along. I thought, yeah, this he's really fits the vibe of a lot of the people in this little corner of the internet in terms of your story. You articulate it better than most people, but yeah, so that's what I do.
That is incredible. Something about you know, you mentioned not starting the meeting off with a, you know, with a word of prayer. That's bold. That's ballsy.
Yeah, for churches. So a
Yeah.
lot of my people, they try to get these groups started. And I always tell them a church is a great place to do this because churches have people with small group experience and all these same skills you need for that conversation group.
Yeah.
But a lot of churches are like, unless there's a clear presentation of the gospel, we don't want that. And then I say, do you hold AA meetings? Well, yeah, well, that's different. All right. Churches are willing to do all kinds of things, but they're a little, and then sometimes people are like, well, what if people say heretical things? And I say, so that's why it's church adjacent. I'm not saying you have to own it. And I don't want you to just jump in and correct it. And because the goal, see, part of what happens so often that I see is the pastor is the last one to know what's going on in someone's life, if it's sort of a shameful or a difficult thing, because nobody can say anything. And, you know, you were honest with, you know, your parents, but in church, what happens is they just disappear. And then it's like, well, they're not coming to service anymore. And so, you know, you go to their house and you talk to them and you realize they deconverted 3 years ago. They were just too ashamed to stop showing up because, you know, it would hurt mom and dad and their sister's feelings. Whereas I would have rather talked to them 3 years ago and say, what's going on? Let's talk about it. You know, let's don't, because I got tired as a pastor when church members bullshit me. And they do. And I understand why, because they have stake. They got stake in it. And so they don't want to, but still and so it's like, hey, if you don't let me know, I can't help. And, you know, even if you leave the church, I'll still be your friend. And just like you experienced at Wheaton. I mean, that's pretty common among Christians. Yeah, there are others who are going to freak out and do stuff. I get it. I believe that too. But it is not the rule necessarily. And for the most part, if Jesus tells you to love your neighbor as yourself all the way up to and including your enemy, then yeah, a lot of Christians are going to be really kind and patient with defectors. So that's for me, estuary was a tool that said, all right. And then other people are like, people are all over the map in all kinds of ways. And so to go to a church, I mean, you're a bold dude. For a lot of people to go to a church, you knocked on the door of the Nation of Islam, for Pete's sake. You are a bold dude. But, you know, for a lot of people, they're afraid. They're scared. They don't want drama. They don't want crisis. So, at least give them a space where they can say, you got questions about the resurrection or the virgin birth. And then other Christians can say, yeah, I wonder sometimes too, but this is what I think.
Hmm.
And then they can talk about this stuff, because why
Right.
not? So that's what I think.
You got nothing to lose, man.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep. And
no,
then,
I
yeah, so
respect the hell out
I
of
do
that.
have to warn you that you already talked to Chad, but because you went up on my channel, there'll probably be more invitations
Beautiful.
to talk to people.
Listen, you think that you're prolific, but man, I can talk up a storm, and when I'm alone in the shower, me, myself, and I, we have great conversations. So if someone else wants to, pop in and let me ramble to them, I'm more than happy.
All right. All that I fully expect the invitations will come. So
Beautiful. Well, I mean, let me hold on. I don't want to. You got a time crunch or anything?
not right now.
Not right now.
We can
Let me
turn
pick
off
your
the we
brain.
can turn off the recording too, or we can leave it going. Either way, I'm fine. You seem like a pretty open person, which made me think
I'm a
this
pretty
would
open
probably be
person.
fine for you.
I talked about not masturbating for 7 years. I think we're
When you talk
okay.
about that stuff, it's like, what won't he talk about?
I'm trying to think what we want to talk about. Oh, the embarrassing amount of beef that I eat every week. My cholesterol is probably through the roof. It's probably like 3 pounds of beef a week. Though I'm sure that's nothing compared to what Jordan Peterson eats every week.
Exactly.
There we go. All right, full circle.
There's a lot of
Oh,
people who listen to my channel that are carnivores, so that you won't stand out because of
that's
that.
wild. Well, I'm not a full carnivore, but I have felt a lot better and a lot have had a lot more mental clarity getting a proper amount of protein in my diet. That and the gym, man. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, the gym, sex, proper diet, and an antidepressant if you absolutely need it. That's the recipe for a happy life
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
my book.
Hmm.
And friends. Those go a long way.
Yeah, friends are
Anyway,
key.
with I don't know that I would have had the balls to do something like that when I was a believer.
To
To
do
to
something like what?
host the estuaries.
Oh,
I keep wanting to say ossuaries, and they're very different things. Um,
those.
that's not prophetic. Yeah, the estuaries. And even now, like I still have a vestigial,
Yeah.
like heresy hunting bone in my body.
Yeah.
Like my alarm bells go off when
Yeah.
someone's like, "Oh yeah, I'm kind of a oneness Pentecostal." Like, hold up, modalist. Um, so
There's another channel's going to reach out to you. Keep going.
oh no, that's modalism, Patrick. Um, I hope you've seen the Lutheran satire bit. He's legendary, beautiful. Um, that's hard because I mean, I've studied this enough that I've studied apologetics enough that I think it unfortunately only goes one way. That if you study it hard enough, it only leads to deconstruction or deconversion.
Huh.
And I know that you would disagree with me, and that a lot of other people would disagree with me.
I don't know that I disagree with you. I think it's an interesting observation, and I think
Hmm.
it doesn't. My initial response to that is not no, because
Okay.
because well, look at what C.S. Lewis said about. So he would go. He had this Oxford club that he did at the women's college, and he said the times that he doubted the faith the most was when he was prevailing in that group, making
Hmm.
arguments for Christ.
That is interesting. I will say that, personally, it's funny. So, right before I went to the Netherlands and had my big, the first real fault line in my faith, my big crisis of faith, I backpacked across Europe, and I remember vividly. Um, I think I hit like 10 countries. Um, but especially in Greece, I had some really in-depth conversations with, just random people backpacking. And it was some of the most like effective evangelism I've ever done. And it was the strongest that my faith had ever been, just, being surrounded by, the lion's den, right? Um, So I don't know, maybe there's something to that, right? Of being surrounded by opposition that makes your faith stronger.
Hmm.
Um, have you experienced the sense that, those meetings tend to be dominated by heresy hunters or
No,
apologists?
no, no.
No. Interesting.
There's a protocol that John Van Donk developed. I called it a protocol. He hates the word, but it really. So we went to Northern England and we did a meeting, and there was a YouTuber up there that had sort of been in our circles and had sort of been kicked out, defected. And he came to the meeting because he knew I was going to be there. And his first introduction is, hi, I'm here, and I'm here to tell you that you're all wrong. That was his introduction. And I thought, well, it'd
Was
be
he a
interesting
believer
to
or
see.
an atheist?
But well, he's an atheist now.
Okay, okay.
No, anyway, so those watching the channel know exactly what I'm talking about. But so what happens is the group gets to select the topic.
Yeah.
And so if someone's going to be a turd, they very quickly get seen as a turd.
Mm,
And so actually it sort of runs in the correct direction. If you have any social gifts at all, you begin to see, if I'm a jackass, I'm going to look like a jackass. So why don't I just have a nice conversation with people? And he stayed a couple hours after the meeting ended too, just talking. He was perfectly lovely. He's a
yeah,
perfectly
yeah.
lovely guy. So, not everybody will in this little corner will agree with what I just said. But no, so the way it isn't just hodgepodgey. There is some structure to the conversation, and the way the conversation is structured,
Yeah.
it sort of lends itself to a good faith, open conversation, which
Mm,
is sort of inquisitive, but by no means domineering. You lose status in those groups if you start to become domineering. So,
got it.
and
Got
the
it.
group will just end if you treat people badly like that.
Yeah.
You're the people. If you're an evangelist, the people that you want to continue the relationship with, they will stop coming, and you will figure that out. So you will
Yeah.
start engaging in a mode which will hopefully continue to extend and develop the relationship rather than shut it down.
Yeah.
Which is what all
Yeah.
your Wheaton friends knew when you left the
Mhm.
faith
Yeah.
instinctively. Maybe not
I
all of
think,
them, but
yeah. I mean, I think I had kind of a mixed experience because, with my parents, it kind of felt like, like they had the wind knocked out of them and they didn't know what to say because I think they knew, like, man, he knows the Bible better than we do.
well, you were an
And
intense kid. So
right.
this was a break
Yeah.
in your character for them. And
Yeah.
so that's different from, let's say, the
Mhm.
friends at Wheaton who knew you as something. So
Right.
parents know their kids in different ways than everybody else do.
That's true. Sounds like you're talking from experience.
I know a few things.
Um, no, but I think, yeah, I think my Wheaton friends also kind of like saw me as the theology nerd and they were a little hesitant to buck up against me, but also they just love the piss out of me. They're wonderful. Um, man, there was something else I was going to say, but I lost it. Something that I feel like I've wanted to, shout from the rooftops recently, just like in talking to pastors, um, you got to play the long game, man. And I feel like
Yeah.
most Christians are not playing the long game.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny. So I'm in the middle of investigating a cult, a predominantly black cult, and it's like everything that my mind is wrapped around right now. Called the United House of Prayer for All People.
Oh, yeah. You did a video on them.
Yeah,
That was
so
fascinating. That was fascinating.
it's just become this huge can of worms that I'm kind of unearthing. And for some reason, like it's just never been covered. Like I've seen a lot of cult podcasts and true crime stuff, and they've just flown under the radar, which is crazy because they've got, tens of thousands of members.
Yeah.
Um, and now I'm talking to some high-ranking ex-members and hearing their stories, and it's nutty, dude.
I'm
So
not surprised. Well, people don't. So I've been around black churches, black pastors, people who have many of the African American members of my church grew up in
Right.
Black churches. There's some cultural aspects to them, and then there, just with every culture, you'll get some extremes, and some of those extremes will get deviant. Uh, it's just the way
Yeah.
culture works. So I'm not surprised
Yeah.
by any of it.
No, me either. I mean, in this case, it's just so damn sad seeing like how much money these people are being exploited out of.
Oh
And it's
yeah.
funny because, so only in the past couple of days, the initial wave of viewership has been all from my subscribers and people who are kind of in that religion questioning sphere. And only in the past couple of days has it started to be passed along to current members of the United House of Prayer. And so
Oh.
I'm starting to get the comments of like, how dare you go in and just take advantage of these poor people, and you don't know it, the first damn thing about this. And one of the funny things though is they always brag about like you're criticizing these churches, but I'll have you know that all 100 locations of our church were paid for in cash. That's not a fucking good thing, dude. That's terrifying. What does that bank account look like, dude? So anyway, that's just an aside. I need to get that out of my brain. Um, but there's been kind of most of the comments have been really, really negative. Either, they've criticized me as a white guy, shitting on a black community,
Yeah.
which fair enough, unfortunately. Or they just say like, oh, you don't understand it, and this is sacred, and how dare you talk about something you don't understand. But there was a couple of people who reached out and they were like, "Hey man, like I noticed a couple of inconsistencies here, and but I hope you'll go back because it really is a beautiful community." That's playing the long game.
Yeah.
That's that's a far, far more persuasive um tactic.
Yep.
And I mean, I've reached out to the guy and I was like, dude, thank you. Sincerely, this is a great look for the church. And same thing happened when I criticized a Mormon congregation a couple months ago. I blasted them, and some of the Mormons reached out and they were like, "Hey, I'm sorry you had a bad time, and I hope you'll come back." That's playing the long game.
Yep.
My fear with Christians in the post New Atheism era, uh, they've started to kind of take the they've stolen the tactics of the Richard Dawkins and the Amazing Atheists, right? I don't know if you remember him from back in the day on YouTube. But a lot of these kind of snarky atheists who just want to shit on religion.
Yeah.
And I can't stand those guys.
Yeah.
And I equally can't stand the fuckers who are just like liberal atheist libtard gets absolutely destroyed by biblical reason. And
Christian YouTube.
Christian
There's a
YouTube.
lot of it.
And I'm starting to feel this tension myself about like, okay, well, what's the balance between clickbait and intrigue, and is it authentic? Is it disingenuous? Is it is it fueling the cynicism? So I'm wrestling through all those questions, and I promise I will fumble and mess up and screw up as I try to stumble uphill. But yeah, Christians got to knock it off with the gotcha shit. You're not Ben Shapiro, and I even when I was a kid, I remember being online and like people would reach out to apologists and be like, "What's the one thing that I can say to my atheist friend that just turns them around?" It's like, I don't know, man. What's the one thing that I could say to you to make you deconvert? There isn't one thing. It's like you are a complex algorithm, made up of 86 billion neurons, and that shit's complicated. And it's going to take a long time. And are you willing to consistently love the shit out of people and suffer through their arguments, the arguments that might make you doubt, question, deconvert? Are you willing to navigate through all that messy shit just to see them through? You know, are you willing to leave the 99 and go rescue the one if that means you have to, you know, get caught up in a bushel of thorns?
And what do you hope for at the other end? I mean, that's the funny thing about all of this stuff is, okay, so now they say they've become a Christian. Good. All
Mm.
right. What's next? I mean, I saw that in some other, I'm not going to name names, saw that in some other denominations and traditions that all of the focus was on
Oh, I'll name names. Yeah, that's the most Baptist thing I've ever heard. That's
all the
that
focus is on that. And it's like, but
right.
then I always thought that there's a little bait and switch there because it's like all you need is Jesus. This is grace alone. So then they say, okay, I'll take that. But after you got him in, it's like, okay, well, now you got to stop sleeping around. So wait a minute. You should have put the preconditions up. I mean, what's with
Yeah.
that? And
Yeah.
of course, with no, people are tremendously complicated, and there is a there is a degree of mystery with, well, again, as a pastor, you're trying to help a community of people become better Christians.
Right. Right.
And while you're hopefully trying to become a better Christian. And part of what's happening now is that a lot of because culture has been changing so quickly, a lot of the sort of the easy boundary marker and terms are sort of switching around. I mean, in the end of the 20th century, well, now you're going to have to give up drinking, and you're going to have to give up smoking, and you're going to have to start going to meetings, and you're going to have to start tithing. Well, there are your
Mm.
boundary markers. And then, of course, then politics sort of came in the 80s, and now it's like, okay, well, what about the politics? Okay. And then
Mm.
it's throughout the history of the church, it's a continual conversation. Jesus says in Acts 1, you will be my witnesses. Okay, well, how do I bear witness to Christ in this place right here, right now? I noticed once that we had some street preachers here along my route in Sacramento, and so I decided to park the
It may
car
have been me.
in Sacramento.
No.
But
No.
I park the car and I go and talk to them because I want to find out, well, who
Yeah.
are you? And then so I start
Hmm.
talking to these street preachers, and I find out they never do street preaching in their own town. They always go to either another neighborhood or another city to do this. I'm like, oh, why is this? Oh, that's just what we do. It's like, so,
Because a
and
prophet is never welcome in his hometown.
I don't know why. And I'm sure you'll find street preachers that do it in their hometown, but
Yeah.
it isn't. I think it's fine to ask good faith questions of people and to kind of think about things. And what is this Christian life? And I mean, I've been thinking about these questions of what is this Christian life all my life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now, thanks to the internet, I think this with lots of other people who, gosh, now we have the Orthodox in the mix. So,
Mhm.
you know, it's, it's a big conversation. And, but like you said, you can boil it down to something simple, which is love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then, well, just figuring out how to love somebody, that's pretty much, that'll take a lifetime. That'll take a lifetime.
Yeah.
People are that complex. So,
Not wrong at all.
well, maybe we should land the plane on this thing. We're knocking on 2 hours. But I will end the recording, and then we can talk offline if you want to a little bit. But I just want to
Sounds like
thank
a
you for
plan.
being willing to come on the channel and to tell us
100%.
about the inner secrets of your life.
I'm an open book, man.
All
No, thank you
right.
so much for having me. This has
Yeah,
been a blast.
I appreciate. Hope we get a chance to talk again.
Me too.
All right.